Today I am attempting what I would call a damn near impossible task. Hi, I'm Bobby. This is Culture Kitsch, and today we are attempting to rank every single episode of Interview with a Vampire so far. AMC's Interview with a Vampire premiered in 2022. It follows the story based off of the Anne Rice Vampire Chronicles book, Interview with the Vampire, and is split up over 2 seasons. So the first half of the book takes place in season 1, the second half takes place in season 2, and in season 3, which is coming out, who knows at this point, we'll follow the adventures of the vampire Lestat in the second book, which is the vampire Lestat. First here is No Notes, Perfect TV. Sounds exactly like it is. Episodes where I literally can't think of anything that I don't really love or that doesn't work. These are practically perfect in every single way. The second tier is basically perfect. These are episodes that are basically perfect. They may have like minor, minute, tiny things, or I just like it a little bit less than the No Notes Perfect TV category, but are still absolutely phenomenal. May not be perfect, but still is great is kind of our like mid-tier episodes. Again, I feel like I'm going to be a broken record about this in this episode, but I do know that I have to reiterate this. This show is far and away above so many other shows. So within the confines of this video, I'm going to be critical, and that doesn't mean that any of these episodes are necessarily bad, but it is just to say that like there are some that are better than others. The fourth tier is Lost Me at Parts, But I'm Still Here. These are episodes that had more parts that I was like about, but ultimately kept me for the majority of the episode. Didn't really leave it with many problems, but there were a few moments where I was like, I don't know. And then our last tier, which is our bottom tier, is still good, but just not a fan. This is perhaps the most subjective category, which is these are episodes that, again, great episodes, but just don't really work for me personally, Bobby, Culture Kitsch, me in the flesh right here. So if you love these episodes that are in these categories, this isn't to say that you love a bad episode. None of these episodes are bad. It's just to say that the ones in this category just didn't work for me all the way. But there are things to appreciate in literally all of these episodes. If whatever episodes end up in my bottom tier are in your No Notes Perfect Television, the fun thing is it can remain in No Notes Perfect Television for you. That's the beauty of this. I'm just some girl on the internet. So do with that what you will. Season 1, Episode 1, entitled In Throes of Increasing Wonder. This is our pilot episode, and this is one of the best pieces of television I have ever seen in my entire life. It's without exaggeration. I love this episode. I rewatch it probably more than any episode in the entire series. I think that it is technically, narratively, characteristically perfect, essentially. Like it almost functions in the way that most pilots do, which is to give us a little bit of the lay of the land very quickly. It's one of the most impressive things I think about this pilot is that it establishes its world building in seconds. Like you immediately know where you are, you immediately know what these characters are about. In this episode, if you're not aware, this is the episode where they are restarting the interview with Daniel and Louis, and they are going back in time. They're starting over. Obviously, we see the bits and bobs of that as the series progresses, but it is to say that this is the beginning. So we're starting at the beginning where Louis is turned, and he meets the vampire Lestat, who comes in like a breath of fresh air. I don't know. He comes into Louis' life and changes it completely. It's hard to sum up everything that's really great about this episode, but I think some of my favorite parts of it and the things that I want to highlight is that the tension, the sexual tension between Louis and Lestat is immediately, like it is on go the second they see each other. And I think I forgot how like thick that sexual tension is between them. There is such electric chemistry between Jacob Anderson, who plays Louis, and Sam Reed, who plays Lestat, that is palpable and is like it's magnetic. Like, they are magnetic on camera together. And I think why I love season 1 a little bit more than season 2 is that they just have such great chemistry that you kind of want to watch them do anything as these characters, whether they're talking, whether they're just walking down the street, whether they're, engaging in extracurricular activities. It doesn't really matter. Like, these two are just in such sync with one another, and the back and forth, the volley between their performances is really great. The standout of this episode and of the season and of the series so far is Jacob Anderson. If nothing else, I think the character work that he does for Luis is so great, because Louis, historically, in the book Interview with the Vampire, and in turn in the movie when he's played by Brad Pitt, he's a bit of a downer. He's a bit of a downer. And I think Jacob Anderson just brings such vigor and texture and complexity to Louis that is so brilliant and is so, like, this is how the character should have been from jump. And I think he has such a keen awareness of who he is in every single aspect, and it shows in his performance. Of course, everyone talks about it, but I have to mention it. It bears repeating. The accent work is phenomenal accent work. For him to not be from that region, and in turn not be from the United States and actually be from the UK, is insane. And when I learned that, I was like, oh my gosh, wow. Because let me tell you something, as someone who's from the South, I'm not from New Orleans, but I'm from the South, and I'm aware of regional dialects. Most British actors come over here and play in our faces with a Southern American accent. Most of them, I would not personally allow them to touch a Southern accent with a 10-foot pole. You see what I'm saying? Jacob Anderson is really a special case where it felt like he was a sponge and just soaked up the New Orleans Black American sound immediately, and is able to portray that through Louis, and it's brilliant. It's brilliant. And it's just, I could go on forever about that, but it's great. That's all you need to know. And of course, it goes without saying, Sam Reed as Lestat, he's not beating those Lestat possessed him allegations. I mean, he is every bit alluring and seductive and just interesting, like both like in character work and also visually just interesting to look at, and how he stands out and how he sounds against the, like New Orleans accent with his French accent. It's just so great. They're both giving a 10 in every aspect in this pilot episode, and there's so much that goes on and so much that lays the groundwork for where their relationship will go, where the story will go. But also, one of the best things about this pilot, and the best thing about any pilot, is that you shouldn't, but you could stop at this episode having experienced a full story. There's so much about Louis that is compelling and interesting, that is kind of explored and kind of wrapped up towards the end of the episode, where you know that Louis is a man who is struggling to come to terms with his sexuality. He is a caretaker for his brother, and he, worries about him quite often. And there's this like looming feeling that he will never have someone for himself, because he has so many things that he has to keep track of, or constantly, make sure his businesses are okay. Like, you understand his different qualms and wants and desires, and you can understand how Lestat comes in and aids or disrupts that and shows him a different side of life that he wasn't even aware of. And by the end of it, you see this like really beautiful arc that happens, that of course is like built up as the episodes go on. But if you were to stop at the pilot, it's almost like a short film. Like, you get everything that you need to know about these characters, and it's a beautiful story that wraps up. One of the standout moments from this episode, if you only had to watch one scene from this episode that I think kind of wraps up everything that I've talked about, watch the confessional scene. The scene where Louis is in the confessional right before Lestat barges into the church and, does whatever he's going to do. It is just such a raw piece of acting that gives you, it's a punch to the gut in the best way possible. It is a crime that Jacob Anderson has gone largely unawarded for this performance and for this season specifically, because it is such a good scene, just like a good scene that immediately, like, even if you know nothing about the character, you know nothing about the show, you watch that scene and you're like, oh my gosh. From how long I have been talking about this episode is in my no notes perfect TV ranking category. It is brilliant. I think it's one of the best pilots I've ever seen. It's one of the best pilots in TV history. And yeah, it's, if you haven't seen the pilot in a while, it is worth going back to, because it's really, really great. Season 1, episode 2, which is called After the Phantoms of Your Former Self. This is the episode where we see Louis fully in his vampire form, learning the ways of the vampire from Lestat. This is an episode that I kind of forgot how much I enjoyed it. It's a lot of domestic Lestat moments. So you're seeing a lot of Louis and Lestat together, and Lestat is teaching Louis how to be a vampire, but you're also seeing them explore their relationship a little bit more and getting to understand each other a little bit more. And it's just really fun, I think, to see that aspect of them. Also, too, we see a lot more of the racial dynamics coming to the forefront, which is one of the most compelling things about this adaptation. In casting a Black man as Louis, they don't shy away from the role that race could play within vampirism, and how Louis kind of sees it as being a vampire while he struggles to come to grips with it. I think he does see it as an equalizer in a way with how he's been treated racially within the city when he's talking to his white counterparts, especially when it comes to business. And there's one scene where he kills this man who keeps calling him boy, and it's like, oh, you are an exceptional Negro and everything like that, like fully demeaning him and talking down to him as if he's this subordinate when he's not. And he then can go and kill him. And then right after that, Lestat like reprimands him, and Louis kind of explains that, like, we live different lives, and so I'm going to react to people in a different way. I can't just let this roll off my back. And I really, really enjoyed, and I think that's what kind of sold me on the show. Even though I love the pilot, I think what really sold me on the show is the desire to kind of navigate that aspect racially. I do kind of miss that in season 2. They address it for like 2 seconds, and then they kind of are just like, Paris was this great place for Black people, and then they kind of move on. But I enjoyed in season 1 that they do explore that a little bit more, and it is very interesting, the commentary that's there. One of my favorite parts of the episode is that scene where Louis, dressed in a suit that is so beautiful. Carol Cutshaw, your work in this series is wow, sir, so good. But he's wearing this beautiful cream colored suit that is just gorgeously adorned with the blood of this racist asshole after he kills him. And it's so great. Like, these suits in this show, everybody's looking good. Everybody's looking good. Oh my God, what am I supposed to say? Everybody's looking really good. So what am I supposed to say? Louis is like figuring out what his vampirism means with his like business partnerships and how he deals with people in his outside life. You can start to see how he is struggling to come to grips with what being a vampire means with his family. So in the pilot episode, we see his brother commit suicide, and so there is a fracturing that happens because of that. His mother blames him for his brother's death, and we start to see her slowly pull away. We start to see him have a hard time being around his family because Louis famously is like a vegetarian vampire. He doesn't like to kill all the time. Now, I will say, season 1 Louis is a lot more, he gets a little bit crazy and is much more willing to kill than season 2 Louis, especially in the beginning. There is a aspect of Louis' character where he is coming to grips with the trappings of vampirism, which is the killing, and he has a really difficult time with that. So you start to see more of the family dynamics kind of break down, and his relationship with his sister, which was really strong in episode 1, you start to see it slowly kind of wither away. And she was kind of the only one who still had his back, after everything that happened with their brother. It's just a very, very interesting dynamic. And then the end of the episode has Lestat and Louis going to the opera. And it's this very, to me, funny scene where Lestat, who doesn't really have much regard for human life, does have regard for the life of musicians. He loves musicians. He loves music. He loves to dance. And he goes to the opera. They both go to the opera. And there's a tenor who does not sound great. And Lestat's dramatic ass takes the tenor home and is like showing him the notes where he messed up. He's marked the notes in his blood on the sheet music to show the tenor every note that he messed up, and then they kill him. And that just shows you the type of character Lestat is. Drama queen. I think this is like a fun episode that follows the pilot, where things aren't super real yet, but they are about to get real. But this is like the honeymoon period before we really set into the dynamics that are at play. So for that reason, this goes in the basically perfect category. It's not a episode that I would say is no notes perfect TV, but it is an episode that is extremely compelling, very, very fun. I do still love it. Season 1, episode 3 is My Very Nature That of the Devil. Now this is where shit gets a little bit real. Louis is very much so losing his grip on humanity and is very much so not getting enough of a grip on vampirism. And that's creating some issues with his relationship with Lestat, his relationship with himself. Like, he's kind of having a bit of an identity crisis. Add on top of that the relationship dynamics of vampires is really coming to the forefront at this point, which is to say that everybody is rated E for everyone. So Lestat, this is the episode where he meets Antoinette, who is a singer. Of course, Lestat is very compelled by musicians, and so they decide to go for like an open relationship type of thing. And this is this is the episode where we get Louis confronting Lestat and being like, okay, if you want to be open, then this goes both ways. Because it's kind of like, I think Lestat was cool with him being open and Louis just kind of sitting at home waiting for him to come back. And so when Louis was like, no, I also have game, so I'm gonna do it too. And Lestat's like, of course. Like he's detonating. He's detonating inside because at the end of the day, he loves his Louis. And this is the episode where we get the iconic "I heard your heart's dancing" scene. And it just shows that they are kind of locked into this dynamic where they do want each other so much, but then they are also like, temptation is a very strong thing. And so we see that a lot in this episode. And it's a lot. It's so much. And I think it's the episode where you can kind of see things starting to break down just a little bit between them. I think the turning point of this episode is towards the end, and one of the best parts, I think, like, even when Louis kind of gets down on himself for what it means to be a vampire in the context of his relationship with Lestat or his family, I think I always enjoy seeing him use it as a using it as an equalizer with these like racist white dudes that he is in business with sometimes. Because at this point, a lot of the white business owners are trying to further push out the black business owners from Storyville, which is the street where they are. And so there is a scene with with John DiMaggio, which, if you don't know who he is, you absolutely know who he is. You know his voice. He's played Bender on Futurama. He's a very prolific voice actor. And it is so funny he's in this show. I'm sorry. It's hilarious that he's in this show. Because when I first saw it, I was like, what am I hearing? Am I hearing celebrated voice actor John DiMaggio right now? Like, it's always so fun. because I love animation and I love voice actors. And so whenever I see a voice actor, like I'm seeing a voice actor in a show, I'm like, Diva, what are you doing here? But in this episode, he gets a little bit too comfortable with Louis, and Louis disembowels him. Let's just say that. He bared his guts and all. Let's just say, and I think this is the episode where we get the iconic like no whites allowed thing that has like since permeated outside of the show and into the grander social media space. And is posted every Black History Month since the show premiered, which is so funny. But that whole thing starts a riot, and this is towards the end where we see Louis save Claudia and asks lestat to turn her. And we see that scene revisited from a different perspective where lestat is very honest with Louis that she won't live a good life. Like, if you do this, like, you are knowingly being selfish with her. But at this point in season 1, we don't know the truth of that situation, for a multitude of reasons, obviously. But there is that turning point again where you see like Claudia come into their life, and now there's a renewed sense of purpose of life that happens with Louis and Lestat and now Claudia. So for all of that, it is an episode that I am putting in the lost me at parts, but I'm still here. It's an episode that I still did enjoy, but it's like not as enjoyable as the first 2 episodes. It's very important narratively, because we get the introduction of Claudia. We get the furthering of like the business angle where things are becoming more and more difficult for Louis, being a Black man owning a business in this area, and also being a vampire and everything that comes with that. So yeah, it goes in the lost me at parts, but I'm still here. Still enjoyable, but not my favorite of faves. Season 1, episode 4, The Ruthless Pursuit of Blood with All a Child's Demanding. This is Claudia's coming out episode. This is from her perspective, reading her journals. So Daniel's reading her journals, and we're seeing what she thought about this time where she is born again as a vampire to her 2 gay vampire dads. And this episode I love for a multitude of reasons, but the main reason that I love it is that it kind of gives us it's almost like a bottle episode, in that it shows like if Interview with the Vampire was like a coming of age show about a young vampire girl and her 2 vampire dads. Like, it is so fun to see this like family dynamic happening. You know, you get the unholy trinity in a way of the 3 of them, and seeing their dynamic together, seeing how with Louis, who is very caring and I think has this very strong nurturing aspect to him with Claudia. I think at the scene where they're in the boat and they kind of talk about, you know, love and what it means for, you know, Louis to be gay and everything like that. And it's just a very tender moment between the 2 of them. But then you get the flip side of it with the less daughter stuff. So Lestat and Claudia together, and you see that they are predators in a very similar way. They are apex predators in a lot of ways. They hunt in a lot of the same ways. They have a lot of the, again, ruthless pursuit of blood. And Claudia is revealed to be a very gruesome killer. Like, she's very ruthless, she goes for it, and I think that is the aspect that Lestat really, I think, appreciates about her. He's very like, that's my daughter, with how she is a very ruthless killer, as opposed to Louis, who required a little bit more poking and prodding. The MVP of this episode, hands down, is Miss Bailey Bass, who played Claudia in season 1. I think she does a phenomenal job of playing Claudia in this younger half of her life. I think this episode does take place over a few years, so like she obviously ages past the age that she was turned, and we get the beginning of the episode, this very like fun family dynamic where they have this kid and they kind of still treat her like a kid. But of course, as it goes with the show and also in anything gothic in nature, you get the reality and the dark, seedy side of it, which is that she is becoming a woman actively in this young girl's body, and it hits her that she will never be able to have a companion or love in the same way that Lestat and Louis have. Like, she'll never have that because she will always be a child. It culminates in her falling in love with a boy named Charlie, and she realizes that she couldn't get too close to him, but she realizes it too late because they're making out, and she bites him and she kills him. And she realizes in real time that she can never be close to anyone, especially a human, and she'll never find a vampire who wants to be with her because she looks like a kid. And it culminates in my favorite moment of the episode, which is the last like 2 minutes or so, where she is speaking in this gorgeous monologue that she talks about her plight, essentially. It is so beautifully performed and written. It is everything. It is the best. It shows the best of the show, I think, in a moment that doesn't have to do with Louis or Lestat. Like, this is Claudia's moment in season 1. And it's so, oh my gosh, I love this episode. I love this episode so much because I love Claudia as a character. I love her down when she's doing good, I'm doing good. So I'm obviously not doing well all the time. I love this episode, and I love that scene. That's the best moment of the episode for me. Also too, like, some of the humor of the series. I think a lot of the times we don't often see the humorous side of the show because there's obviously a lot going on, clearly. But this episode, I think, gave a little bit of a window to, like, when it wants to be Interview with the Vampire can be a hilarious comedy. I think about that scene with Louis and Lestat talking about Claudia's like outfit, and Lestat's like, I don't know how I feel about that skirt, and Louis is like, it's chiffon, it has movement. Like, we wouldn't get that really in most other episodes, but it's so fun and I love it. And with that being said, no surprise, but it may be a surprise to other people because I don't often see it ranked very high all the time, but this is a no notes perfect TV episode. I love it truly. I think it is a beautiful performance all the way down, and yeah, I love this episode so much. I love it so much. Whew, okay, season 1, episode 5, A Vile Hunger for Your Hammering Heart. Now, this was a controversial episode. Watching it in real time, being in the fandom, seeing everyone's response to it, it's a lot. It's a lot as an episode. It's a lot. That's the best way I can describe it. It is just a lot of things happening all at once. It is Claudia's kind of like antsiness to get out into the world and figure it out for herself, not just be seen as a kid, that comes to a head. That decision makes Louis depressed, which in turn affects his relationship with Lestat. Lestat gets antsy and, goes back to Antoinette, even though they, wanted to be together and everything. Then it ultimately, like, the episode ends with this very big DV scene that happens. And I remember when this episode came out in the fandom on Twitter, whoo, what a moment in time that was. Let me tell you, it was insane. There were people being like, that just wasn't Lestat, that could never be Lestat. There were people being like, I'll never watch this show again. It changed a lot of things, and I think it changed a lot of people's perspective, and I think it really tested, like, okay, you guys signed up for a gothic show. You're getting a gothic show, and it's really exploring those more, I guess, taboo elements. It was an interesting time to be in the fandom when that episode came out and to see the response to it, and to see how people began to speak about the subject of abuse, and how there were, me being nice, varying levels of understanding what abuse is and how we talk about it and how we understand it. It was an episode that I think was very gutsy. Let's just say that. It was a very gutsy episode. And of course, it reminds us that at the end of the day, vampires are monsters. They do monstrous things to each other. It doesn't negate the fact that there is a depiction of a relationship here, and there's a depiction of, love between these immortal beings, but it also challenges us to think about, like, what does love look like between immortal beings? What does love look like with a very uneven power dynamic that happens between Lestat and Louis? Because they are never going to be equals in the way that we understand most regular relationships to be, because Louis, or Lestat, is Louis' maker, which will always make him older and stronger. And in the realm of vampire politics, that definitely affects their relationship. Lestat will always have the upper hand on Louis. And so that drastically affects their dynamic. And this episode, I think, really put that on display. Where I think it becomes tricky for me is the effectiveness, I think, of that. From a technical aspect, I think this episode was a bit of a traffic jam episode. It's like, it is a lot that is happening. It is like one thing after another, and it's not just like the biggest moment being the domestic violence stuff. I think also too, Claudia goes out into the real world, so to speak, and when she goes out, she is sexually assaulted. And I think that is one of the only parts of this entire series that I actively did not enjoy. I think it's a very harmful trope to do the woman goes out into the world and gets assaulted or raped to toughen up. And I think that narrative with this particular episode was not received very well. And I did not love it at all. You can say, like, oh, it's gothic, you should expect it. I don't really care. I didn't like it. And that, I think, is what makes this episode not fully work for me. I think this is the episode that exposes them needing that extra episode in this season to kind of further flatten things out in a much more orderly way. I think there is an aspect of it that is a bit pacing wise. We're moving at breakneck speed, and it makes it to where you're not really able to sit with one thing. You're just like, it's very high emotions the entire time. And it's a difficult episode. It was supposed to be a difficult episode. That's not really the issue. I think narratively it's just a little bit clunky, and it's a little bit jammed, and it just, had they had another episode tacked on the end of it, maybe exploring all of those different aspects would have felt a little bit different. But for me, this episode was just, like I said, it's a lot. There was a lot of talk, especially with the whole idea of, like, memory is a monster, Louis being an unreliable narrator, everything that's happened with, like, memory and inconsistent memories being this theme. There was this thought that in the second season they were going to go back and be like, Louis made up all of the abuse and made it all up, and it never happened, and Lestat would never do that. And then when it came out that Lestat did do those things, it did happen, and Lestat was remorseful for it. I think that was the best way to come back to something like that. But in the moment of season 1, episode 5, it was a lot, and the ensuing discourse, you can only imagine. I don't really have, like, a favorite moment, but one of my favorite line reads in the entire series is the conversation that Lestat, Claudia, and Louis are having, where Louis and Lestat are kind of confronting Claudia of her, like, erratic behavior, because she's starting to really get very, like, unhappy with her existence and the realities of it. And Claudia pulls out a winner in exposing Lestat.
White girl down in Algiers sings torch songs with a flat no nothing ass. Been following you, Uncle Les. You ain't been your careful self. I'll get you. And when I do, you're gonna be busted.
You better work. You better work, diva. For the sake of ranking and things being in specific categories, this episode is a still good but just not a fan for me episode. Really, I would put it between the tiers where it's like a lost me at parts but I'm still here, but also a still good just not a fan episode, where I think it's a lot that it is juggling, but separating it from the narrative things that are going on, so the things that are happening in the story, I do think technically it is a bit clunky. It's a little bit, pacing wise, it's a little bit inconsistent with the other episodes that we've had that I think do address difficult topics, but lay it out in the way where you can really digest what it is the story is trying to do. I think this is a traffic jam. They jammed in a lot of things that are very high emotion, and ultimately when you jam in Claudia goes out and she gets assaulted and comes back. When you jam in a very gruesome domestic violence situation, like that is a lot for an episode to carry. And ultimately, I think it can kind of diminish some of the emotional weight of it and make it very difficult to parse through and really understand and take in like what this moment means for these characters. It's not necessarily the show's fault that it didn't get another episode of it. I think they could have laid these things out separately of each other and it would have been narratively a little bit better. That's not the show's fault. That's a network thing. And ultimately they did get that extra episode in season 2, which is helpful, but there is another episode in season 2 that also kind of suffers the same fate where you're packing in a lot of stuff. And ultimately with shorter television seasons, that is something that's gonna come up. Like there is going to be a traffic jam episode because you are working with a lot less episodes than historically we used to get in television. I think if it was 13 episodes, this wouldn't have been an issue. Even if they had 10, it wouldn't have been an issue. You know, at 45 minutes to an hour a piece, I think it would have been laid out very easily. But when you're working with 7 episodes, there's going to be an episode where it feels like you're getting inundated with a lot of information. And unfortunately, that was this episode. Like I said, there are parts that worked for me. There were parts that really did not work for me. Really did not love the sexual assault plotline for Claudia. I think it's a grossly overused trope. I think it was not necessary, and it is, for where that character ends up, it just felt like overkill to me, but that's just my opinion. So this one is a still good, but just not a fan. Moving on to season 1, episode 6, entitled Like Angels Put in Hell by God. This is the come down episode after episode 5. So like I said, episode 5 was a lot going on. In my personal opinion, it felt a little bit clunky. This episode is the necessary before we move into the finale. Like it is the necessary valley before we go back on another hill. I think it is an episode that has a Herculean feat in front of it, which is to, how do you move on in the story after everything that happens in episode 5? And I think it does it well. I think it does it pretty well. Like there was inevitably going to be a very emotional response to episode 5, and so I think to the best of their ability, they did the best that they could with what does afterwards look like within this dynamic, within this trio. And so they move on, and you can see the very contentious, difficult dynamic between Lestat and Louis afterwards, where Louis is very obviously recovering from this very insane thing that has happened to him, with how Claudia feels as well, where she is immediately like, we gotta take this guy out, like we gotta get rid of him, this is not a good situation for us, and her helping Louis to rehabilitate. Lestat in his own way feeling remorseful, but still I think wanting to be around, but knowing that he can't because he obviously did something very not good. And it is like I said, it's a very thankless job to be the episode after an episode like that. I think it sticks the landing for the most part. This is the episode where we get the iconic "Come to Me" scene. So this is the song that Lestat had written for Louis. One of my favorite songs. It was in my Spotify Wrapped. Yeah, absolutely it was. And he comes to Lestat, who's at Antoinette's house in Antoinette's bed, and they are bumping purses. And Louis literally swims in a river to get to them, and he comes and confronts Lestat, and they have a very entangled limbs like reunion of sorts, and it's very interesting and complex. And then ultimately that leads into a scene which is I think the best moment of the episode, where you have Lestat finally telling Louis and Claudia who he was before he became a vampire, or as he became a vampire, how he became a vampire. And it just shows that Lestat, up until this point, that we've known him, he's vulnerable, but he's not been as vulnerable as he could be with these two who are now his fledglings. Like, there you see the blind spots of Lestat as, someone who has made other vampires. You can see how he's been hurt. It's a thing of like, hurt people, and so you understand how this hurt person was hurt and how they were turned, and the trauma and everything that goes with that. And I think it's really interesting because it kind of, this scene was the skewer, I think, in the fandom in a lot of ways, where people heard that and were like, oh, I get him, I understand him. And then there were people who were like, I don't care. And I think the show does understand that. It understands that there were going to be people who weren't exactly on board with what Lestat was saying, especially after episode 5. And it invites a very interesting dichotomy to everything. From Claudia's perspective, I think she still is dealing with a lot. I think this is the episode where she tries to leave again, and because that sends Louis into a depression, and Lestat doesn't like that, he goes out and gets her. We get the scene on the train. I remember there being some discourse about whether that was funny or not. I think it is a humorous scene, but ultimately, like, what it means, like, obviously is not very fun. But like, this show is not depicting a lot of fun things, you know what I mean? So it's like, okay, well, and so you get that scene, and then at the end you have the chess scene where Lestat and Claudia are playing, and Claudia and Louis telepathically are talking, and she's basically saying, like, we got to do something about him. Like, this is the time. You need to nut up or shut up. We got to get rid of this guy. And so they begin to plot their plan that obviously comes to fruition in episode 7, which is the finale. And again, this episode, like I said, I think it has the thankless job of being the episode that comes after an episode like episode 5. It is a lot going on, but I think it handles it pretty well for the most part, as far as, depicting what follows that before we get into the insanity of the finale. And it was an episode that I think I enjoyed just enough. Like, I think it was good enough for where we were. A necessary moment of before we pick back up again. You know what I mean? If nothing else, I think the scene with Lestat is very compelling. It's beautifully performed. I think it is Sam Reed exposing Lestat's kind of like soft underbelly a little bit, and a very fleeting moment of vulnerability from a character like that we don't see again until one of the very last scenes of episode 8 in the second season. And so it is a very interesting glimpse into perhaps like some of the realer sides of this character, because you have to remember this is all happening in recollection of Louis, and we obviously see how his memories were tampered with in season 2. So this like a momentary sense of realism that happens with his recollection of Lestat. And I think it's a very like I said, very vulnerable, very tender scene, very quiet scene, very, it's not very boisterous. It's not a lot of yelling. It's not any of that. I think it's very simple. And what I really love about season 1 is that it is blocked and composed almost like a black box theater performance. Like, the sets are very simple. They only go to a couple places, and really a lot of it takes place within the house. The cast is very small. And so that allows you to really zoom in on those like character-driven moments. And this is Lestat's character-driven moment. If Louise was in the confessional, if Claudia's was at the end of episode 4, this is Lestat's moment to bare his soul to us, the audience, and also in recollection of Louis. And I think it's really great. So ultimately that lands this episode in, may not be perfect, but still is great. Which brings us to season 1, episode 7, The Thing Lay Still. This is the big finale, the big kaboom. This is what it's all been working up towards. Everything comes to a head, and what I really love about this episode is that there is such delicious tension. Again, not necessarily sexual this time, but just very much so everyone is on their guard tension. that I think is so brilliantly performed by everyone in the cast. It's the thing where it's almost like everyone's got a weapon behind their hand and they're trying to act like they don't. It's like a thing where you don't know what about who, and it's just so, it's a lot of complexity. It feels like, the pieces of the puzzle coming together. This is the episode where Louis and Claudia are planning to, off Lestat, but Lestat outsmarts them and has Antoinette, she's been following Claudia, and so he's been aware of her plan the whole time, but then Claudia is outsmarting him because she was aware that Antoinette was following her and everything. It comes to a head in such a beautiful way, and it is so satisfying and so fun. And then on top of that, you have the three of them conspiring against the town, and they're going to expose themselves as vampires and, everything. And there's just this beautiful performance, this beautiful party that they're throwing. And this is some of my favorite costuming work. Again, Carol Cutshaw's work on the show is phenomenal, and we see that really come to a boiling point with their costumes for this episode. These beautiful white garb. Obviously Lestat is very flamboyant and everything that Lestat is, pretty much. The Lestat costume that he wears, it made me think of something that I am manifesting very heavily for season 3, which is that I hope that he wears a similar frock during his rockstar Lestat performances and era that evokes Madonna's VMA performance, the Like a Virgin performance. I hope he wears something similar to that as a callback. That would make my life. So writer's room, I know you're listening. If you need some ideas, I am available. But that is an idea that I would love to see. We get a beautiful Lestat moment where Louis is very much so in contention with himself over, he has this duty to Claudia. He knows that this is the best thing for him and Claudia, for Lestat to be gone. But he also still loves Lestat, and there's a really beautiful complexity that happens there. They have such this connection to each other, and you really can't let it go, and it culminates in this beautiful dance scene with them dancing together, and they kiss in front of everyone, and it's very scandalous and crazy, and it's such a gorgeous scene. And I think there are very fleeting moments of vulnerability from both of them, especially in these last 2 episodes. You get this these small slivers of vulnerability that almost feel human from both of them, just in how they feel about each other. It just shows at the core of everything they still do love each other, and it just shows how complex love and relationship and hurt functions in this show. If the show really is playing with a lot of different dynamics when it comes to that, and there's a lot of complexity that happens there, and so it's really interesting and very fun. My favorite moment of this episode is really the last 15 minutes are phenomenal. One of my favorites is Claudia taunting Lestat where he's bleeding, and she's like, oh, oh, oh. It's just so funny. It's just perfect Les daughter moment. It's all really, really great. And of course, by the end of it, I wanted to strangle Louis de Pontulac because I guess he messed up the plan. It was beautifully executed to see the turn and then the double turn and everything using Big Brother terms. It ultimately culminates in Louis letting love win, and he does not let his lover die formally, which we see the ramifications of in season 2. Ultimately, this is an episode that I do quite enjoy and I love very much, and it is not one of my favorites, but it is so brilliant. It's basically perfect, and so it goes in my basically perfect category. So now this brings us into season 2 with season 2 episode 1, which is What Can the Damned Really Say to the Damned? This is an episode where we see the aftermath of New Orleans, where they execute their plan to kill Lestat, but we know that he's probably still alive at the hands of Louis, and after Louis refuses to burn Lestat's body to confirm that he will be dead, so Claudia's pretty pissed at him about this, rightfully so, and so she's icing him out completely. They are in Transylvania, they're in Romania, and Louis is very much so like just wanting Claudia to talk to him again. And so he's willing to kind of go wherever she wants to go. And she is on a hunt to find other vampires because she's like, there have got to be better vampires out there. There have to be better vampires out there. They have gone to Europe now to search for more vampires. We're getting into the episodes that I have talked at length about. So if you're interested as I go on in more in-depth analytical commentary, I do have a full playlist of all of my season 2 recap reviews. So I will put a card up here for each one of them, and then at the end of the video I will link it so that you can go through and watch it all yourself if you prefer playlist form. Or I have a full, I think, 8-hour long video that you can just put on in the background that has all of my commentary about season 2. So I'm just going to hit the high notes. But if you remember from my very first video that I ever did for this channel, my critique of this episode is that it feels like a episode that should have been released ahead of this season. It feels like an episode that is the kind of wedge between the two episodes. It doesn't really feel very harmonious fully with the rest of season 2. It feels like it should have been something that was released in like the winter before it premiered in May. Like I think if it would have released almost as its own episode that happens like a midwell almost, I think it would have been a lot more effective. But it isn't to say it's a bad episode by any means. It feels very different. Like season 1 is very opulent, it's very boisterous, it's beautiful, it's New Orleans, it's everything that comes with the beautiful city of New Orleans. And in season 2 episode 1 we are in very bleak, dark, cold terrain. It's very quiet, it is very opulent. It is not, let's just say that. And so it feels very different. Even going into somewhere like Paris, which is obviously there are very characteristic ties between New Orleans and Paris. This is like that strong dip between the two seasons, and it's very different. It's very different from where the season eventually goes, and I think it would have been better released ahead of the season. This doesn't feel like a season opener to me at all. It feels like a mid-cool episode, or like a very special episode of Interview with the Vampire that kind of takes place in the story but outside of the story. Now there are parts of it that I did enjoy. Obviously the very end of it with Louis telling Claudia that if it was just them it would be enough, and obviously we see how that plays out, where that is both true and not true within season 2, and ultimately where that lands with their relationship and with their dynamic, but also the double entendre of like he's telling that to Claudia, but now Ghostlestat is present, and seeing like, you know, who is he really talking to? And this episode does give us the introduction of Ghostlestat, which is a hallucination of Louis. I will have thoughts on Ghostlestat as we move on, but we get the introduction of that version of Lestat in this episode. And like I said, it is an episode that I think is still great. It just feels a little bit out of place. You could definitely tell it is a continuation of the story, obviously, but it didn't feel like a season opener to me, in my opinion. And maybe it wasn't supposed to, which is fine. So with all of that being said, this is a lost me at parts, but I'm still here category. Season 2, episode 2, which is Do You Know What It Means to Be Loved by Death? To me, this is the season opener. This is the episode that kicks us into the narrative again. We're in Paris now. Louis and Claudia have made it to Paris. This is where we meet Armand, and then also in present day in Dubai. I didn't really talk about the interview, the titular interview happening in season 1 because it's prominent, but it's not as prominent. It becomes much more of a narrative center in season 2, obviously, with, you know, the revelations of Daniel and Louis together and all those things. But season 2 brings Louis and Claudia in Paris, but it also brings Armand. He's in episode 1 as well, but it brings him more formally into the interview himself, where he is also being interviewed in tandem with Louis. Very heavy Lumond energy happening here. And so this episode is so much fun. I think whenever an episode establishes a city as a character, which New Orleans is obviously a very heavy character within season 1, Paris now becomes a character within season 2, and it's very, very fun. You get to see Claudia finally get what she wants, which is to meet other vampires that maybe don't suck. We see where that goes, but she finally meets other vampires, and it seems like they get her, and she finally has this family that I think she wanted to have, and that she had for a little while with Louis and Lestat before everything, went to the shitter. But we get fleeting moments of happiness with these characters, which are moments that I always love. Like I said, they are fleeting in that they don't happen often, but they are beautiful nonetheless when we do get them. We get the beginnings of Louis and Armand's relationship, which becomes a whole thing as we see. But it starts out very, very dainty, very demure, very, quiet, like little flirting here and there. I'm on the rebound, type of thing from Louis, but we see how that very quickly progresses. We also get, I think, one of the standout performances of this season, which is Ben Daniels as Santiago. Oh my gosh, what a performance. I think my favorite moment is during the Théâtre des Vampires performance at the end. Obviously, if you've seen the movie, if you've seen the show, you know what I'm talking about. But when he utters the name of the episode, which is "Do you know what it means to be loved by death?" I think Ben Daniels gave such a powerful performance as Santiago that is every bit, beautiful and sexy and alluring, but also you can feel this air of dangerousness, and there is such a strong sense of self with Santiago. Like, there's so much happening there, and it's a magnetic performance. That's the best thing I can describe it as. It's magnetic. You can't help but keep your eyes on Ben Daniels as Santiago. It is brilliant, and he is so hot. One of the best performances of the episode is that scene. And so getting to know the Théâtre des Vampires before they all turn to the worst people I've ever seen, and getting to see how happy Claudia and, to a certain extent, Louis are, while also handling everything that goes with, all of what being in a new environment brings them. This is an episode that I really enjoy, and this is an episode that is basically perfect to me. So this brings us into season 2, episode 3, entitled No Pain. If you've watched my recap review of this episode, you know how I felt. I didn't love this episode, and in going back and watching it again, I understand what it's doing more, but I still don't think it landed with me fully. So this is an episode where we get a lot of flashbacks to Armand and Lestat's relationship, and it's fine. Like, I think it's necessary, it's important, but this episode was similar to episode 5 to me, where it felt like a bit of a traffic jam. I think the way that things were laid out felt just the teensiest bit clunky to me. I think it's necessary because you have to establish Armand and Lestat's relationship and how that colors Armand and Louis' relationship, and how everyone was involved with everyone had a taste of everybody, and that makes things difficult. So narratively, it's necessary. I think just how it played out and how it was executed, I didn't fully love it. I think the jumping to different books thing, I think, again, if you've read the books, I think that was probably like a really fun moment. I think the whole, was it wolf killer Lestat thing. I'm still reading the books, okay? I think if you're a book reader first, if you're a book fan first, I think this was a good episode for you. But I remember saying in my review, and I remember people not really being a fan of it, but it felt the teensiest bit alienating to me as someone who has not gotten through all of the books yet. Again, not a bad episode by any means, just a bit narratively packed in a way that can kind of distract and not let you sit with the details of any one thing. We're moving through a lot of things, and it's not as emotionally weighed down as some of the other episodes, like episode 5. But I think it's just like you're packing in a lot of information so that we understand different things about these characters that will eventually pay off later into the season. When I went back and watched it, I was like, this, I don't dislike it as much as I initially did, but it just doesn't fully work for me all the way. And I think, again, it could be the fact that they are like rehashing the Claudia essay plot line that I really didn't like. But they are rehashing it again so that Louis and Claudia can kind of maintain their storyline with the coven of where they came from and everything, because if the coven knows that they, lestat, that's going to create some problems. It obviously eventually does, but it is they have to get the story straight. And so it's Claudia going back and again talking about this very traumatic moment for her. I think it's beautifully acted with Delaney Hales, who is now our Claudia for season 2. Very vulnerable moment for her and exploring that situation. We realized that it was more traumatic and completely heartbreaking. I didn't love that aspect of the episode. We also get Claudia, finally, she's being inducted into the Théâtre des Vampires, and before she can be fully inundated, or fully brought in, she is like in this hazing period, so everyone calls her Puce, and which is like flea in French, and they kind of treat her as such. And then we get glimmers of this really fun dynamic with her and Santiago, who, like, he doesn't fully treat her as like this, pledge intern, like lower than subordinate. He actually, I think, gets her and understands her, and there's a really fun situation happening between them. Ultimately, we know that is him mining for information that ultimately leads to her demise, which is not fun, but it's fun to see that, like, in another timeline, in another alternate universe, they might have been friends, and to see glimmers of that then turns so sour so quickly is like, oh man, like, it's just like, oh, I really like this. Whatever was happening here, I really like that. So it's like, it sucks, So we also see that, like, Claudia's time as Puce, finally, this is her moment. She gets to be a part of the troupe officially, but she's playing a role as a baby, as a child character again. She thought that her moment now in the Théâtre des Vampires would finally be her being seen as an adult, which she is. Inside she is like a 30 or 40-year-old woman, but she still looks like a child, and so they give her this role of baby Lulu, and you get this moment from Delaney, which is so, I mean, every frame of painting really with her, where you can see the disappointment in her eyes, and her eyes get so big and like emotional, and like you can just read it immediately. And there's this like scene where she's so happy to be like in this group, and she finally feels like she's with people who get her, just for them to show her that they don't get her at all, and she feels lonely again. So with all that in mind, this is a still good, but just not a fan episode. I think there are some moments to be enjoyed, obviously, in the flashbacks with Armand and Lestat, seeing like Harlequin stat, so seeing Lestat, kind of played as this clown of sorts, is very fun and engaging. I think Sam Reed chewing the scenery, obviously. It's just a very fun aspect of the performance of Lestat, that we get glimmers of in season 1, episode 7, but we see played out in much more detail with the first iterations of the Théâtre des Vampires, seeing Lestat as the actor that he is. And so that's very fun. But the rest of it, I was like, I was like, all right, it's necessary, but I'm like not the biggest fan of it, of course. But again, I know there were plenty of people who really like this episode. There were plenty of people in my comment section when I reviewed it who were just like, no, I actually really enjoyed it. So let me live on my island by myself of not liking this episode, but you more than welcome to. Season 2, episode 4, entitled I Want You More Than Anything in the World. Now we're on the upswing. Like, we're on the upswing with this episode. And it's not that exactly that it's like all, sunshine and daisies, but it's like a little bit less of a downer episode. So we get in this episode, Claudia is doing the Baby Lulu play to great success. She's killing it, obviously, but it is a bit of a soul killer in that she's playing a kid every single night multiple times, and it's like she can't escape it, and she's lost her passion for the work. But Armand, being the dick he is like forcing her to wear the costume all the time, and it's like it's not a great thing. Like, I just don't love it. I don't love it because he was kind of being a dick about it. And then when she looks to Louis to be like, hey, get your boyfriend, he's like, and y'all didn't like it when I talked about how, like, I didn't like Louis for doing that. And the thing is, y'all are going to be mad at me again because I still don't like that he did that to her. Like, yeah, my mind has not been changed. I don't care. Like, I know that, like, she wanted to be in the coven. She wanted to be a part of this. But, like, still, you know what I'm saying? Like, whatever. Anyways, anyway, I'm not trying to start a war. Put the weapons down. Just saying, I did not love that aspect. We do see, though, like, things that are working out for Claudia is that she's kindling a bit of a friendship relationship with Madeline, who is the seamstress that lives in town, and they meet and they have their whole little thing, and it's very fun. I'm like, thank you, finally something for my girl. Louis and Armand are continuing to, progress their relationship. You can definitely tell at this point that Louis is kind of taking on, or trying to take on, the role that Lestat took on with him in their relationship in season 1, where he's trying to be a bit like, cool, like he's on the rebound, a bit like aloof, whatever, like take the power reins. But again, he can never do that because Armand is 1,000 years old. He'll never, power dynamic wise, they will always be unequal. But they do explore that in a very interesting way, and how, like, Armand and Louis have engaged in this dom sub dynamic, and we're doing it for 70 years and still we're doing it, because the whole time in season 1 Armand was playing a servant named Rashid, and it was just like a whole thing. It's like, leave your kink out of this interview, please. Leave it out of there, okay? No one wants to see it. But we can see the beginnings of that drumming up in this episode. This is also the episode where we get Claudia laying into Louis, as should have been done. Yes. Because Louis is like trying to put their whole situation on to Claudia, and she's like, your boyfriend just threatened me with the knowledge that he knows what we did to Lestat, meaning that he's threatening violence against me. And this is now the third person who has choked Claudia out against a wall. All 3 of them vampire men have done it. Yeah, let's talk about it. Let's wake it up. And so she goes to Louis, and she's just like, oh, love makes you stupid. Like, you don't see what's happening here. You don't see, like, we are in danger. And he's just like, oh, our mom wouldn't say that. And she lays into him. She's like, you picked another one over me. Like, what you said in that carriage ride in episode 1 was not true. I will never be enough for you. And that's very clear and evident to me. It was a necessary fight. I don't care. It was a necessary fight. Ultimately, the episode ends with Louis taking Ghostat, who has been a consistent presence up until this point, and tells him, I'm letting you go. And he kind of washes away this figure that he's kind of made up and has presented for himself and everything. And it's, Ghostat going away. And I think this is what I was saying in episode 1. I think Ghostat as a narrative device is very, very interesting, having this figment of Louis' imagination manifest in Lestat, but it is Louis kind of puppeteering Lestat. That's a very interesting narrative device. However, I think that we should have missed Lestat a little bit more. Like, it does feel like they kind of peppered in more and more Ghostat moments to satiate people who are maybe only in the show for lestat, like being like, no, 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 we promise, like lestat is still, well, he'll be here, like he'll be here, he's not like dead, like he'll still be here. And we knew that he was going to come back eventually, but it felt like we should have missed him a little bit more. I think there should have been less ghost stat moments so that when he comes back in episode 6 and we get going with the trial and the finale and everything like that, it punches a lot more, where it's like, oh my god, like here he is, the diva is back. Like, because we see him in basically every episode, or hear him at the very least, you don't really get to miss him much or really sit in the relationship dynamic of Louis and Armand, because Lestat's always there. Like, it's like that moment from Armand in episode 5. It's like Lestat. Like, it's always him. And I get it, he's the main character of the Vampire Chronicles, but it does sometimes, to me, Red is like, it kind of steals away from all the other characters when we were constantly seeing him, versus I think it would have hit a lot more if we saw him a little bit less in the front half. Still, you can have ghost stat moments, and I think there were plenty of ghost stat moments that were compelling, but to have him there a little bit less, so that when he comes back in episode 6, it would have been like, wow, like he's back, you know, like this is insane. It's all been building up to this. That's just a personal thing. You know, I'm never going to say no to the appearance of Sam Reed, especially as Lestat. I'm never going to be like, oh no, I don't want to see it. But I do think for the health of the narrative in season 2, it was encumbered a little bit by, it felt like either the show or the networks fear that no one would care about the show if Lestat is not present, which I don't think is true. I think there was plenty for the audience to be compelled by and to be interested in, even if in Lestat's absence. Like, there was plenty there to be satiated by, and it felt like the reliance on Ghostat felt like a crutch at points. Ghostat technically goes away in episode 4, but we do hear Lestat in episode 5, and then he comes back in episode 6. So like, you don't really get a chance to like miss him. Like, he's still there, you know. And of course the narrative is centered around the fact that like Lestat and Armand have had relations with him, so it's like, it's not like he was going to just go away within the course of the story. But it is to say that like, physically seeing him or hearing him, like I want to miss him a little bit more. I want to be like, oh, he's back. A nitpicky thing, an ultimately not important thing, but I just wanted to lay that out. So season 2, episode 4, ultimately is an episode that I think is pretty good. Like, I really do like it, and for that, I think it's basically perfect. So I'm putting it in basically perfect. Oh boy, now we get into season 2, episode 5, entitled Don't Be Afraid, Just Start the Tape. This episode, my gosh, what a piece of television. My goodness, what a piece of television. From every aspect. I can't in good faith just relay everything that happens in this episode, because it is a lot in a way that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, you are getting inundated with a lot emotionally, and a lot of revelations, and just how it's laid out that could mirror episode 5 from season 1, could mirror episode 3 from season 2. But what makes this episode different is, I think, when you strip back all the layers, when you strip back the opulence of Paris, when you strip back the Theatre des Vampires, when you just make it about this core group of characters, which to me, Interview with the Vampire is always at its best when it's operating in the rules of 3. When you just put 3 characters in a small, confined environment, that is when the show shines through, because it exposes the writing and the brilliance of the writing, and how purposeful the writing is, and how purposeful the direction is, and how purposeful the performances are. When you strip it down to just that, you know, very much like a folk thing, you know, 3 chords and the truth. Like, when you make it very simple, you see that this show is not just how big it can get. When it's super small, it's just as good too, if not better. And I think this episode exposes that a lot. Like, it makes it very clear that if you thought we were getting out into, you know, the wilderness, and, you know, going very big by being in Paris and doing all that stuff and yada 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 and bringing in more characters, let me remind you, we're still true to this. That is what this episode is. It is wall to wall fantastic performances. You have, this is them, they're not in Paris, they're in San Francisco in the early 70s, and this is Daniel kind of filling in the pieces, and in turn Louis filling in the pieces that have now been like revealed to have been blocked out by Armand. And it's the two of them putting their heads together to fill in the gaps for each other and to find out what happened between the three of them in San Francisco in the 70s. And it is so, I'm just going to keep saying it's so good. It's so good. But it really is so good. I think the performances in this are very, very great. The MVP of this episode really kind of juggles between the three main actors that we have here, which is Jacob Anderson as Louis. Obviously, we have Assad Zaman as Armand, who's been doing masterful work up until this point. I forgot to say, in episode 4, we get the scene where Armand he has his kind of soft underbelly, vulnerable moment where he's talking about his origin story. And it's so, I think Assad's performance of Armand manages to toe this very delicate but balanced line of soft and gentle, but also very powerful. And there's this like quiet dominance to the performance that he has, and it's so brilliant. And you see that in that museum scene where it's the more vulnerable, emotional side. He's allowing himself to be understood. The whole thing that he says of like, am I marred by my history that I've endured? Like, am I my history that I've endured? And it's so compelling and beautiful. But then in episode 5, you get this really like almost like, not scary. It's not a scary performance, but you get this performance that you're like, oh, like this is the other side of Armand, like he's able to be delicate and soft and quiet, but then he's also able to be this like figure. And it's not that it's like it comes from a lot of yelling or anything like that. I think how Assad delivers his lines, especially in a specific scene where he's talking to Daniel, who at this point is played by Luke Brandon Field, who's also phenomenal in this episode. He's speaking to him and saying that, is that what makes you fascinating? Like, there's this clip that he's speaking that is so like methodical, and it is just so calculated, and you cannot help but be a little bit fearful because you don't know what's going to make this character snap, or that this character has snapped. And he's kind of like a Venus flytrap in a way, where he's unassuming and then he just bites you and it gets you, and it's so crazy, and it's just it's so good, and the acting is nuts. I think the construction of this episode is crazy from every aspect. I think the set is, obviously the production design is very bare bones. They're just in one kind of bare apartment, and there's not much to work off of, which is like in opposition to the very lush sets that we see in the other episodes. This episode is very simple in its construction, and I think that allows for the characters to move about in a way that feels very theatrical. I mean, so many of these actors in the show have a very strong theater background, and I think when the show evokes the stage the most, when it evokes the stage, is when you can see that those backgrounds like really putting in the work for television, which is a different medium. It requires different things. So I think it is them being able to, use their theater chops in a way that works so well for the medium of television and is so beautifully done. Season 2, episode 6, which is entitled Like the Light by Which God Made the World Before He Made Light. Beautiful title. The main crux of this episode is, this is again the come down after episode 5, which there was a lot of revelations. We're doing a lot is happening in this moment. This is the come down. This is like Claudia's swan song in a way, where she finally gets the girl. Her and Madeline have built up their relationship, and it is now time for Claudia to ask Louis if he can turn Madeline for her, and almost like it's like the scene from the movie with Kirsten Dunst, the scene where she's like give her to me before you leave me. Like she knows that they're coming to a crossroads in their lives, and she needs Louis to help her because she's not a strong enough vampire in order to turn another. And she's just like, I need your help with this. Like, I need you to do me a favor. And Louis is a little bit apprehensive. And so that requires him to go to Armand and, put in a good word. And there's this moment where you can kind of see them and you see that they're coming to the end. And I think they're both recognizing that. There is a lot of, I think there could be some, it could be read as Louis being a little bit cold and distant to Claudia, but you can tell that he does still care about her quite a bit, obviously, because he wouldn't put his neck out, I guess, to Armand to ask him to be a part of the turning of Madeline and introducing a new vampire into the fold and everything like that. And it's just so great. The scene where Madeline is turned is brilliant. It's so beautiful. And my favorite part is when Louis is recounting what he was seeing while he was turning Madeline, and he sees how Madeline sees Claudia, which is just this beautiful person. And like he basically says, like, and that was when I knew that Madeline would be a better companion to Claudia than I ever could. And I think that's the moment when he's like, she's gonna be okay, like girl who's gonna be okay. Like it's very much so that. And it's a gorgeously laid out scene, and everyone's like happy for 2 seconds before we get the reality of the situation, which is the coven this whole season has been building up a case against Louis and Claudia for the death of Lestat and the death of Antoinette in season 1, and that's against the vampire laws, yada yada yada. We've been through this. And so now they're ready to take them to trial. And so they like capture them, and it is like they're happy for 2 seconds. And I think Claudia and Madeline had like left Paris and then they came back. And I was like, y'all should have just stayed away. You should have just stayed away. But they all get captured. And of course, we see the return of the Huntress Lestat. Like Lestat is back. And I tweeted this, and of course we get the return of Lestat, and I tweeted this because I was like, the climate wasn't right, but he was looking damn good in this scene. And it's one of the best Lestat moments. This like pinstripe like suit combo, a fresh press and curl, the bob is bobbing. He looked great. They look great. And I can't say that in the moment because of the implications of the situation. But he looked phenomenal. It's always when he's at his worst or about to gravely harm somebody that he's looking his best. Like episode 5, he was wearing that like very svelte all black number. And I'm like, he looks great. But I can't say that in this moment. But he looked great. I can't take that from him. I really can't. I cannot take that from him. So with all that being said, being that this is the episode that kind of is the come down before we go back up, it is an episode that may not be perfect, but still is pretty great. If nothing else, the Madeline and Claudia of it all is phenomenal. And it's an episode that I like. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching it. So now we're at the penultimate episode of the season, which is season 2, episode 7, entitled I Could Not Prevent It. This is the trial. Like, we're now fully into the trial. Lestat is back. He is on trial against his former lover and daughter, and now the coven has built up this case. This is kangaroo court, essentially. It's not a real trial. But they built up this case against Louis and Claudia and laid it out in the form of a play like that the Théâtre des Vampires would do. And I just wrote down, everybody's pissing me off. Everybody's pissing me off because Santiago stole Claudia's diaries, which that also breaks another vampiric rule. You're never supposed to commit the history of the vampire to page or anything like that. And so in her diary, she writes down about how they killed Lestat, so they can't say that they didn't because she wrote it down. And so it's how the trial is laid out is obviously like it is annoying. It is frustrating because you know that they are helpless essentially. But it is well laid out. It's well executed technically in the episode. It's very compelling to see how everything comes together. Lestat is up there, yada yada yodel. Ultimately, the biggest point of this episode to me was the death of Claudia, where she is so, this is her last hurrah, you know, like this is the final moments of her life, a life that I think she had a lot taken from her. I think she had a lot not given to her, and it is just, it's heartbreaking. It's gut wrenching because it's both, you're both sad and happy because in her final moments she does have someone in Madeline who is given the option to live, but in the face of death she says, my coven is Claudia. You know, I'm in this for her. I'm doing this for her. I won't stray from her. And it's good to know that one person explicitly stated and held to it and stood on business for her in her final moments before she died, before they both died. And it culminates in this scene where Claudia is singing, you know, the Baby Lulu song, I don't like windows when they're closed. And as she's dying and her last look is to Lestat, to her dad, essentially. Louise is about to be up next to die, and then everyone, before they can say, you know, like death, like the whole sentencing thing, they say banishment, and it's like, oh, who's controlling the crowd? Uh-oh, it's Armand. Not really. It's Armand who came in to save the day, blah 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 blah. Well, obviously no, that's not true, but it is an episode that is well constructed. It's cunning. It is frustrating to watch from Claudia and Madeline's perspective, but just seeing how that all plays out into the grander narrative is very interesting. But it is the perfect, like we're rolling to a boil, like we're reaching a peak, and you see that play out with this episode. And I think having that extra episode really helps, because if all of this, the events of episode 7 and 8 were compacted into one episode, it would be too much. Honestly, I think it would get those narratively clunky allegations for sure. But it doesn't. Because you have these two episodes where the trial can exist over, you are able to sit in those different beats a lot more. And it's great. It's fantastic. I think it's beautifully paced, well plotted, obviously well performed, and it's wonderful. It's basically perfect. And so finally, that leads us to the end, the last episode so far, which is season 2, episode 8, entitled And That's It, There's Nothing Else. So basically, we get to the end of the trial and we see that Louis has been saved by Armand, allegedly, from not being killed, but instead being banished. And so they banished him to the box, the rat box or whatever, in an attempt to kill him again. He is able to escape, and when he gets up, he lights that place up. He kills the entirety of the Théâtre des Vampires in a scene or sequence of scenes that is so satisfying, so deliciously gorgeous, and just like, oh my god, love it, love this scene. An honorable mention of one of my favorite moments of this entire episode, or honestly this entire season, is Daniel Hart's score. Daniel Hart did beautifully in season 1, but there is something about that jazzy, like noir sound for season 2 that he had that was so good. His score is so brilliant, and it was one of my favorite aspects of this entire season. And every time there's this like kind of fun noir thing that happens in the show, you get that score, and it's so, oh my god, it's so good. I've talked at length in my season 2 reviews about Daniel Hart's score, but it's really, really good. When you go back and watch the season, go back and listen to it very like purposely for that score, because it's just brilliant. But we get the whole thing where Louis goes and kills the coven. Then he has this reunion with Lestat in the layer, and it's like Lestat and Armand and Louis makes a very emboldened thing of like in Lestat's face, he's like, I choose Armand. He's the only one who saved me. Yada yada yada. We also get a mention of Akasha. We get a mention of Akasha in this. Fingers crossed we will see her very, very soon. So excited. But we get a mention of Akasha in this scene too, from Lestat, where he's like, I have the blood of Akasha, and I wanted to scream because I don't know who's gonna play Akasha yet. No one knows. I don't know if they've cast her yet. But oh my gosh, Sam reads Lestat with whoever will play Akasha. I'm rooting for them off rip. I'm sorry. I know they're about to do some of the most conniving things ever, but that, you gotta let me have this one, okay? Like this, you don't know what this woman means to me. Like, please. But yeah, we got a tiny Akasha mention, just literally the line, I have the blood of Akasha, which basically is Lestat's like, you will not fuck with me thing to Armand. But yeah, there's a big moment where Louis makes a very grand gesture that he chooses Armand and fuck Lestat and blah, 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 blah. And so that ends the interview. And this whole season, Daniel has been getting more and more information from the Telemasca, which is like the secret society that surveils vampires, witches, and the like supernatural creatures. And they've gotten more information for him for this interview. And it culminates in my favorite moment in the episode, and one of my favorite moments in the entirety of the series, where Daniel goes in on poking holes in essentially Louis' story, which we see has been greatly marred by Armand's psychological torture. The whole season has showed that Louis' memory has been inconsistent, and not just because of him, but obviously he's being manipulated by Armand. And we see that mostly in episode 5, and then it comes to a head in episode 8, and Daniel just goes, I have some more questions. And he just starts hitting him and hitting him and hitting him. And he exposes that it wasn't Armand who saved Louis from being killed by the Théâtre des Vampires. It was Lestat. This whole time, it was Lestat who saved him. Armand did nothing. And Armand was the one who directed the lynching that was Claudia and Louis' impending death. It was Armand all along. It was him. He was behind it. Lestat actually came in and saved him. Now he could have, saved a little bit of extra power and saved Claudia, but he was the one who saved Louis. And so that brings us to Louis being donezo with Armand, essentially. Like, he's like, Louis was like, relishing the fact that, yeah, Armand saved me. And Armand was just like, okay, yeah, I didn't, but sure. And when it's revealed that it wasn't Armand, it was Lestat, Louis is just like, oh, so you plotted to kill me and my daughter. You killed my daughter. And you messed up my memories. Yeah, we're done. We're done. We're done. And so they were done. And the end of the episode, obviously, we have the moment we've all been waiting for, the Lestat reunion of all Lestat reunions. Louis and Lestat are grieving parents, essentially. They're not just reconciling their relationship. Claudia's gone and they were her parents, and so they are grieving parents in that moment. And it's just this gorgeous scene. It's my favorite moment of the episode, where it is, for the first time, we're seeing Lestat not through anyone's eyes, but we're seeing Lestat for the first time. He's cradling a plank of wood, so things are going well for him, obviously. And he is this like kind of shell of the man that we saw all throughout season 1 and in glimpses of season 2. Like, he doesn't feel like the same guy. And it's that's how you know that this is the first time we're seeing Lestat for Lestat, not through anyone else's eyes, but just through a objective lens. And it ends with them having this rekindling of not their relationship, but this reunion, and it's beautiful, and there's a hurricane happening around them, and it's crazy. The last shot of the episode is Louis being like, I own the night. He's taking it back, like in memory of his brother Paul, in memory of Claudia. He's ready to embrace vampirism and take on the vampire world, who are mad at him for doing this interview with Daniel, who is a vampire now, by the way, at his old age, Jurassic age, in fact. But he is ready to take on the vampire world, and he says, I own the night. And this episode, it was so satisfying in so many ways. It is so fun, the twists and turns. I saw nothing coming. Like, I'm aware of the story of Interview with the Vampire. Like, I'm aware of it in the sense of the movie and like going through the book and everything like that. But I was like, like I was shocked the whole time. Like, I was just in it for the ride. I very much so taken this show as it comes to me. I try not to jump ahead. Like Louise said, let the tale seduce you. A lot of y'all don't do that, but like I do. I'm a good listener. I have my listening ears on. I was letting the show come to me as it did, and in doing that, it was I had a ball. Like I was like, wow, like I was having a ball watching this episode. And I have no notes. It's perfect TV. And that's it so far. Like, this was, I think I was fair, hopefully, with all of my assessments of the ranking. This is the final ranking that we have so far. I hope everything is to your liking, and I'm sure if it's not, you'll be able to tell me in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe. Comment what was your favorite episode of the series so far. I'd love to know. And what episodes are you like, they're still good, but you're just not a fan, and everything in between. I'd love to know in the comments down below. As always, I'm Bobby. This is Culture Kitsch. I don't have an outro yet, but I will see you next week.